Do you mind, Bobby? How many former Democrats or independents, libertarians we got here in the room tonight? Awesome. Thank you. So you know what we're talking about.
In the Democratic Party that we were raised in, the Democratic Party of John Kennedy or Robert F. Kennedy doesn't exist anymore. The Democratic Party that I grew up in was the party of peace. It was against war. My father died running against the Vietnam War. My uncle spent 1,000 days in office fighting against his military-industrial complex, his intelligence apparatus to keep our country out of war. It was the party of constitutional rights, of civil rights, including, especially, beginning with freedom of speech. It's now the party of censorship, and it's the party of war. And, you know, Kamala Harris said in this extraordinary speech, as she did in front of the Democratic Convention, which was filled with this pugnacious belligerence, this promise to make America the dominating military power in the world. And this is what's gotten us all into all the trouble. Before her, immediately before she went on, we had an ex-CIA director, Leon Panetta, speak at the Democratic Convention. This is not the Democratic Party that I grew up with. I would never do that. It was all kinds of military generals speaking at that convention. The Democratic Party in recent days, including Vice President Harris, has touted the endorsements of Dick Cheney.
Dick Cheney will be voting for Kamala Harris.
Cheney, son of George W. Bush's Vice President Dick Cheney, declaring she and her father will be crossing party lines to vote for Vice President Kamala Harris in November. This comes days after John McCain's son Jimmy announcing he has become a Democrat and will also vote for Vice President Harris.
Значит, фаворитом, если можно так сказать, был действующий президент, господин Байден. Вот он, его сняли с гонки, но он рекомендовал всем своим сторонникам поддержать госпожу Харрис. Вот и мы тоже так сделаем, будем ее поддерживать. Это во-первых, а во-вторых...
Раз завещали, значит надо, да?
А во-вторых, она так выразительно и заразительно смеется, что это говорит о том, что у нее...
And John Bolton and 225 other neocons who have endorsed Harris against Trump. Well, those people are the people who brought us the Patriot Act. They brought us the surveillance state. They brought us the censorship state. They brought us the torture regimen, the extraordinary renditions. They brought us the Iraq War, the biggest foreign policy debacle in the history of our country. They have not, Dick Cheney has not changed his minds about those policies. None of them have. They still believe that those were all good things for our country. So when they endorse the Democratic Party, it's not because they've changed. It's because the Democratic Party has changed radically. Our party was a party of tolerance, and today the Democratic Party is the party of hatred and division. And, you know, I have many old friends. Most of my old friends are Democrats. And I don't hate them because they're supporting Harris. I think they're wrong. I think it's a bad choice. But I don't hate them for it. I don't consider them deplorable. But they consider me deplorable for supporting President Trump. We ought to be able to talk with each other without hating each other. Kamala Harris's brother-in-law, who is her campaign manager or finance director, has taken leave of being the general counsel for Uber, one of the most anti-union, anti-labor organizations in this country. They are on the side of big tech and the intelligence agencies, because they are all linked. And I'm scared of those people running our country. That terrifies me. We were the party of peace. Now the Democratic Party is the party of war. They're the party that gave us Ukraine. They're the party now that is threatening to put missiles into Russia, to the Kremlin, to mainland Russia, and start World War III. My uncle did everything in his power to avert a conflict with Russia, including doing something nobody ever did, but to have direct contact with Khrushchev. They exchanged 26 personal letters. My uncle put a hotline in the White House so he could talk directly to Khrushchev. In the White House today, nobody's talking to Putin. Nobody's talking to the Russians. Nobody's listening to what they're saying about the red lines that we are creating. And it's really, they've brought us now to the brink of nuclear war. We're closer to nuclear war than any time that we've been since 1962. And it's terrifying for me, the leadership in the White House. If there is a nuclear exchange, 5 billion people will die. A full-blown nuclear exchange with Russia and China would be over, the World War III would be over in 73 minutes, and 5 billion people around the world would die. And, you know, all of the worries about climate and everything else are dwarfed by the worries of nuclear war. And they have us right at the brink. So it's a different party, and we've had this extraordinary inversion now, and this is now the party of the values that I cherish.
Прошу вас. Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Мы видим, что современная военно-политическая обстановка динамично меняется, и мы обязаны это учитывать. В том числе возникновение новых источников военных угроз и рисков для России и наших союзников. Обновленные редакции документа агрессию против России со стороны любого неядерного государства, но с участием или при поддержке ядерного государства предлагается рассматривать как их совместное нападение на Российскую Федерацию. Также четко фиксируются условия перехода России к применению ядерного оружия. Будем рассматривать такую возможность уже при получении достоверной информации о массированном старте средств воздушно-космического нападения и пересечении ими нашей государственной границы. Имея в виду крылатые ракеты, беспилотники, гиперзвуковые и другие летательные аппараты. Оставляем за собой право применить ядерное оружие в случае агрессии против России и Беларуси, участника союзного государства. С белорусской стороной, с президентом Беларуси все эти вопросы согласованы. В том числе, если противник, используя обычное оружие, создает критическую угрозу нашему суверенитету.
Today we're launching a joint declaration of support for Ukraine, recovery and reconstruction to make it clear we stand with Ukraine, now and in the future. That starts on the battlefield. I'm determined to ensure that Ukraine has what it needs to prevail in its fight for survival. Tomorrow, I will announce a series of actions to accelerate support for Ukraine's military. This war has shown the Ukrainians can do anything they set their minds to. Today, we show we're not alone.
Let me just tell you kind of the lead up, what happened in the lead up of the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war, we were lied to because we're told, oh yeah, this evil Putin trying to take over Europe, and this is his first step to reestablishing the Soviet Empire. And that, you know, it's the same comic
And is
book.
that a lie?
Yeah, it's the same comic book description we were given of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, which we were just lied into a war. And yeah, it was a slam dunk that he had weapons of mass destruction. Of course he didn't, and he had nothing to do with terrorism. And he was running the most progressive nation in the Mideast. It was a secularized nation. It wasn't a theocracy. He wouldn't let people, you know.
And I will agree that, you know, maybe
right,
in
well,
hindsight that was a mistake. But
all right,
Putin,
then let me tell you what happened. The real story behind what happened in Ukraine. let me go back to 1992, because 1992, the walls come down, the Berlin Wall comes down, and Gorbachev does something very courageous. He goes to Tony Blair and George Bush, and he says, I'm going to allow you to do something that nobody in their right mind would do, which is I'm going to remove 450,000 Russian troops from East Germany, and I'm going to allow you to unify East Germany under NATO, which is a hostile army. But I want one commitment from you. You will never move NATO further to the east. James Baker, who was then Secretary of State, famously said to him, we will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. So then, 5 years later, 1997, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the first of the neocons, comes along and proposes, let's move NATO to right up to the Russian borders. We're into 15 nations, okay? And at that time, the most important diplomats in American history at that time were George Kennan, who was the architect of the containment policy during the Cold War. He said, if you do that, you're going to force, this is crazy, it's insane. Russia just lost the Cold War. We should be giving them a Marshall Plan and integrating them into the civilized society, the Western society. Don't make them an enemy. Don't treat them like they're still an enemy. This is going to force a violent military response from Russia if you do that. Bill Pierce, who was then the Secretary of Defense, threatened Clinton that he would resign if they went ahead with this plan because it was so reckless. And Bill Pierce is now the head of the CIA. Bill Perry, who was the U.S. ambassador to Russia at the time, said the same thing. Why are you doing this? This is crazy. So between now and then, we moved NATO into 14 countries. Why do we move NATO in? Because when you move them into a new country, they have to sign a contract that conforms all their weapons purchases to NATO specifications, which means you have to buy the weapons from Northrop Grumman, from these big U.S. military contractors who profit from war. So we move it there. In the meantime, we walk away unilaterally from 2 nuclear weapons treaties with Russia. Russia wants those treaties. They're intermediate range missile systems which destabilize Europe when we remove our agreement not to fire missiles on Russia. And we put Aegis missile systems, which are nuclear capable, in Romania and Poland.
But the broad story, listen, you know the details, and these details, and I'm not taking a side on this, but if there was any, which a lot of people aren't really advocates of, but Trump, if anything, kind of, and whether he was a puppet or not, whatever you believe, he kind of normalized the Russian relationship, kind of, right, by becoming somewhat of a friend of Putin's. So between that time and the time that Putin, there was no NATO movement between the time after the Trump administration.
Yeah, well, what we did is then we overthrew the government of Ukraine.
So no, he came into Ukraine before.
We overthrew the government in 2014. USAID, which has spent $5 billion, which is a front for the CIA, which everybody acknowledges, went in there and started a revolution called the Maidan Rebellion, where there was these protests that ended with the overthrow of the elected government of Ukraine that wanted to keep Ukraine neutral. Yanukovych wanted to keep NATO neutral. We wanted a pro-U.S. government. So we went in there in 2014, overthrew their government, and placed a government. And by the way, a month before the overthrow, we now have tapes that you can go on the internet and listen to. Victoria Nuland, who's the head of the neocons now, the deputy director of the State Department, choosing the new Ukrainian cabinet that will be put in place after the coup that was still a month away. So she knew the coup was coming a month in advance.
But who is she to us?
She's us. She's the head of the State Department. She's now, number 3 in the State Department. But she's been in the State Department. She's one of the, she runs the neocon program, which is, continual wars. So we then pick a new government. The new government comes in, immediately begins attacking the people of Donbass and Lugansk, who are Russian-speaking ethnic Russians. They banned the Russian language, there was two languages, there were two official languages. Ukraine, they banned that. Violence immediately erupts, and they kill 14. There's a civil war. This war started in 2014. There's 14,000 ethnic Russians are killed. And Putin kept saying, you're killing our people. He's trying to get a peace agreement. They finally work out a peace agreement called the Minsk Accords. Germany signs onto it, France signs onto it, England signs onto it, and Russia sign onto it. Zelensky runs in 2019 as president. He has one platform issue. He's a comedian and an actor, which I'm not.
Is there anything wrong with that?
Oh, my wife is one of those.
Okay, all right.
So, but he never had any political experience.
Right.
But he wins with 70% of the vote. Why? Because he runs on a peace platform. I'm going to sign the Minsk Accords. As soon as he gets in there, Victoria Nuland and the ultra-nationalists, which is a nice way of describing the people who run that government now, tell him that he can't do it. He can't sign it. So he pivots. And then Putin then says, okay, Putin is now faced with this problem. The United States government is now running the government of Ukraine. And he is frightened to death that the U.S. Navy is going to go into Vladivostok, which is, the southern port. It's been the Russian port. It's the only warm water port Russia has for 347 years. So he then goes right into Ukraine into Crimea, and takes Crimea without firing a shot. Doesn't kill a single person because the people of Crimea are ethnic Russian and want him back, want him in there. Donbass and Lugansk then votes 90 to 10 to join Russia. Putin says, no, I don't want you. I want Ukraine to be a functioning state. But let's sign the Minsk Accords. And they won't sign it. So then he sends in 40,000 troops. I'm almost done with this. Okay. He sends in 40,000 troops. That is not somebody who wants to conquer Ukraine. It's a nation of 44 million people. All he wanted was us back at the negotiating table. Zelensky, we will not help Zelensky negotiate. So he goes to Israel and gets Naftali Bennett and Erdogan in Turkey to sponsor negotiations, and they go and they work out a peace agreement. And they sign it in April of 2022. Putin is withdrawing his troops according to this peace agreement, already starts withdrawing them. Biden sends over Tony Blair and tells Zelensky to rip up the peace agreement. Now, how do we know this? Because all of the negotiators are now talking, including Naftali Bennett, and you can look it up when you're on the internet. You say you spend a lot of time.
I do.
Look at his speech where he tells you what happened. The lead Ukrainian negotiator this week came clean and said, yeah, that's what happened. Of course, Russia's been invaded 3 times through Ukraine. The last time.
So is Russia the good guy in your mind?
No, Russia, it was illegal what Russia did. We have to understand they don't want this war. We wanted the war.
So I'm actually enjoying watching the Ukraine Hawks quietly, delicately tiptoe back from their position as this thing has unwound into a disaster. The first half of this race, I was the only person standing for it. Now they're actually quietly coming around to being more cautious, as they should. Level with the American people here. Ukraine is not a paragon of democracy. This is a country that has banned 11 opposition parties. It has consolidated all media into one state TV media arm. That's not democratic. It has threatened not to hold elections this year unless the U.S. forks over more money. That is not democratic. It has celebrated a Nazi in its ranks, the comedian in cargo pants, a man called Zelensky, doing it in their own ranks. That is not democratic. More facts for you that you won't hear from the mainstream in either party or the mainstream media. The regions of Ukraine that are occupied by Russia right now in the Donbass, Luhansk, Donetsk, These are Russian-speaking regions that have not even been part of Ukraine since 2014, that other people probably couldn't name those provinces for you. Those are the hard facts. And so to frame this as some kind of battle between good versus evil, don't buy it. And I'd like the likes of the sharpest of the war hawks on Ukraine, Nikki Haley, to have some accountability and answer. Do you want to use U.S. taxpayer money to fund the banning of Christians? That is actually what's happening. They're using the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They have banned them. The Ukrainian parliament just did this last week, supported by our dollars. And I think you owe it to the American people, Nikki, to at least this one time at least condemn.
Thank you. That's time.
At least to condemn their banning of Christians.
Mr. Ramaswamy, thank you. Mr. Ramaswamy, thank you. We asked the questions. Ambassador Haley,
well, she deserves to
what is your take